How did America and Israel's war with Iran really begin? The story nobody tells. There's a photograph, black and white, faded, taken in Tehran, 1953. It shows two men shaking hands in front of the Golestan Palace. One is American, the other is Iranian. Both are smiling. The American is Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, a CIA operative. The Iranian is Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, who would rule Iran for the next 26 years. That handshake changed everything, not because of what it represented in 1953, but because of what it set in motion. A chain of events that would lead, decades later, to American jets bombing Tehran while Israeli missiles destroyed an ancient nation's leadership. The war you're watching today didn't start in 2026. It didn't start when Trump ordered strikes. It didn't even start when Khomeini took power in 1989. It started with that handshake. And to understand why America and Israel are at war with Iran now, you have to understand what that handshake meant, what it created, what it destroyed. This is not the story you'll hear on the news. This is the story behind the story, the one that takes 70 years to tell, the one that explains how a country that was once America's closest Middle Eastern ally became its greatest enemy. Let me take you back to the beginning. Chapter 1. The Coup, 1953. Iran in 1953 was not the Iran you know today. It was a constitutional monarchy, secular, westernizing, progressive by regional standards. Women didn't wear headscarves in Tehran. Universities taught Western philosophy. Nightclubs played American jazz. And Iran had a prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was elected in 1951. His platform was simple: nationalize Iran's oil industry. For decades, British and American companies had extracted Iranian oil and paid Iran pennies on the dollar. Mossadegh said no more. Iranian oil belongs to Iran. He won in a landslide. The British were furious. Iran's oil was controlled by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which would later become BP. Nationalization meant billions in lost profits, so Britain asked America for help. President Eisenhower agreed, not because America cared about British oil profits, but because Mossadegh was popular with Iran's Communist Party. And in 1953, during the Cold War, anything that helped communists was a threat to American interests. The CIA designed an operation, codename TP Ajax. The plan was to orchestrate protests, bribe military officers, spread propaganda, and create enough chaos that the Shah, Iran's monarch, who had limited power under Mossadegh, could dismiss the prime minister and take full control. Kermit Roosevelt ran the operation from a basement in Tehran. It worked. On August 19, 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah took absolute power. Iran's oil remained under Western control. Democracy was replaced with dictatorship. And that photograph was taken. Roosevelt and the Shah, shaking hands, smiling. America had just staged its first successful coup in the Middle East. It would not be the last. Chapter 2. The Alliance, 1953 to 1979. For the next 26 years, Iran was America's closest ally in the Middle East. The Shah modernized the country. He built schools. He invested in infrastructure. He bought American weapons, billions of dollars worth. Iran became the regional military power. But he also ruled with an iron fist. Dissent was crushed. Political opponents were arrested, tortured, killed. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, became one of the most feared intelligence agencies in the world. Thousands disappeared into SAVAK's prisons. And the United States supported him, trained SAVAK officers, sold him weapons, defended him diplomatically. Because the Shah was anti-communist, because Iran's oil kept flowing, because stability in the Middle East served American interests. But beneath the surface, anger was building. Religious leaders opposed the Shah's secularization policies, students opposed his authoritarianism, workers opposed the economic inequality, the poor opposed the corruption, and they all blamed America. Because everyone knew the truth. The Shah was in power because the CIA put him there. SAVAK existed because America trained it. The torture, the disappearances, the oppression, all happening under American protection. That anger simmered for decades, and then it exploded. Chapter 3. The Revolution, 1979. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was an elderly cleric living in exile in France. He had been expelled from Iran in 1964 for criticizing the Shah. For 15 years he lived in Iraq, then France, delivering sermons that were smuggled into Iran on cassette tapes. The message was simple. The Shah is a puppet of America. Iran must be free. Islam must govern. By 1978, Iran was in crisis. Protests were growing. The Shah's crackdowns were becoming more brutal. The economy was struggling, and Khomeini's message was resonating. In January 1979, the Shah fled Iran. The military refused to defend him. The government collapsed. On February 1, 1979, Khomeini returned to Tehran. Millions greeted him in the streets. The Islamic Revolution had succeeded, and immediately the new government made its position clear. America was the enemy. The great Satan. The power that had installed the Shah. The power that had oppressed Iran for decades. Iran's relationship with the United States was over. Chapter 4. The Hostage Crisis, 1979-1981. On November 4, 1979, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. They demanded that the United States return the Shah, who was receiving medical treatment in America, to face trial in Iran. President Carter refused. The hostages remained captive for 444 days. It was a humiliation for America. Every night, news broadcasts showed angry Iranians burning American flags, chanting, "Death to America," holding blindfolded hostages. The crisis defined Carter's presidency. It contributed to his defeat in the 1980 election. The hostages were finally released on January 20, 1981, the day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. A final insult to Carter. But the damage was permanent. For Americans, Iran became synonymous with hostage-taking, terrorism, fanaticism. For Iranians, America became synonymous with imperialism, oppression, interference. The relationship was poisoned, and it would only get worse. Chapter 5. Israel enters the story. Israel had maintained quiet relations with Iran under the Shah. Both countries opposed Arab nationalism. Both saw Iraq as a threat. Cooperation made strategic sense. But after the Islamic Revolution, everything changed. Khomeini declared Israel an illegitimate state. He called for its destruction. He supported groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, both dedicated to fighting Israel. Iran became Israel's primary strategic threat. Not because Iran attacked Israel directly, but because Iran built a network of proxies, militias, political parties, armed groups that surrounded Israel and challenged its security. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria and Iraq, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, all funded by Iran, all trained by Iran, all advancing Iranian interests while threatening Israeli security. Israel responded with targeted strikes, assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists, cyber attacks on Iranian facilities, bombings of weapons convoys heading to Hezbollah. It was a shadow war, fought for decades, never publicly acknowledged, but constant. And through it all, America supported Israel, because Israel was America's closest Middle Eastern ally, because Israel's enemies were often America's enemies, because supporting Israel was politically essential in American domestic politics. So Iran's conflict with Israel became Iran's conflict with America, and America's conflict with Iran became Israel's conflict with Iran. Two conflicts merged into one. Chapter 6. The Nuclear Program. In the 1990s, Iran began rebuilding its nuclear program. The program had started under the Shah with American support, but after the revolution it was abandoned. Then, quietly, it resumed. Iran claimed the program was for peaceful energy production, nuclear power plants, medical isotopes, scientific research. The United States and Israel didn't believe it. They saw centrifuges enriching uranium. They saw ballistic missile development. They saw underground facilities built into mountains. They saw a nuclear weapons program. For years, diplomacy was attempted. Sanctions were imposed, inspections were demanded, negotiations were held. In 2015, a deal was reached, the JCPOA. Iran agreed to limits on its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. But Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018. Sanctions resumed. Iran resumed enrichment, and the conflict escalated. By 2025, Iran had enriched enough uranium that a nuclear weapon was within reach. Not months away, weeks. That became Israel's red line, and America's. Because a nuclear-armed Iran would change everything. It would threaten Israel's existence. It would trigger a nuclear arms race across the Middle East. It would make Iran untouchable. Diplomacy had failed. Military action became inevitable. Chapter 7. The 70-Year Circle. So now we return to that photograph. Kermit Roosevelt shaking hands with the Shah. The handshake that installed a dictator, that trained a secret police, that created the conditions for revolution, that turned Iran from ally to enemy. If America hadn't overthrown Mossadegh in 1953, would Iran have had an Islamic revolution in 1979? Maybe. Maybe not. But the coup guaranteed that when revolution came, it would be anti-American. Because the revolutionaries could point to 1953 and say, this is what America does. They overthrow elected leaders. They install dictators. They oppress us. And they weren't wrong. If Iran hadn't taken American hostages in 1979, would the relationship have been salvageable? Maybe. Maybe not. But the hostage crisis guaranteed permanent animosity. Because Americans could point to 444 days and say, this is what Iran does. They take hostages. They humiliate us. They chant death to America. And they weren't wrong either. If Israel hadn't built its security strategy around containing Iran, would Iran have focused so heavily on supporting anti-Israeli groups? Maybe, maybe not. But the shadow war guaranteed escalation, because each side could point to the other's actions and say, they're trying to destroy us, we have to fight back. And both were right. 70 years, each action creating a reaction, each reaction justifying more action, each conflict building on the last, until we arrived at February 29, 2026. American jets bombing Tehran, Israeli missiles destroying Iranian leadership, Iranian rockets targeting American bases and Israeli cities. War. Not because anyone wanted it in 1953, but because a handshake in 1953 set in motion events that made it inevitable. The answer. So when people ask, why are America and Israel at war with Iran? The simple answer is nuclear weapons, regional proxies, national security. But the real answer is longer. The real answer starts with a coup in 1953, with a dictatorship supported for 26 years, with a revolution fueled by anger at American interference, with hostages taken and held, with nuclear programs developed and opposed, with shadow wars fought and escalated. The real answer is 70 years of decisions, each made for rational reasons at the time, each creating problems that seemed manageable, until suddenly they weren't. The real answer is that history isn't a series of discrete events, it's a chain, each link connected to the next, and that chain began with a handshake in Tehran. Kermit Roosevelt and the Shah, 1953, two men smiling, having no idea what they'd just started. End.